I wanted to explain what my family went through.
I'm here to tell you how it started.
انزل على انزل على
شو فايدتنا كأهل إذا مش قادرين نحمي أولاد؟
No one ever thought any of this would happen.
So what you just saw there is All That's Left of You, one of the hottest movies of the year. It's coming out tomorrow. It premiered at Sundance Film Festival, which is extraordinarily difficult. It was an entry for Best International Feature Film at the 98th Academy Awards, or it is. It won nominated for Best International Feature at the 2026 Film Independent Spirit Awards. And we're really lucky to have the writer, director, and producer of that movie, Cherien Dabis, with us right now. Cherien, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. Thrilled to have you here. Tell us what the essence of the movie is first, and then we'll dive into the details.
Well, the film is an intergenerational epic that follows the sort of traces the story of love and loss across 3 generations of one Palestinian family. It's sweeping in scope in that it covers, many decades, more than 7 decades. From 1948 until almost the present day, but it's also quite a personal, intimate story as well that really dives deep into the lives of these characters and how they're impacted by, all of these political events.
So it obviously 1948 is a huge part of that. And Cherien, here in America, we're kind of taught that Israel just popped up and the whole world wanted Israel to happen. That's why the United Nations voted for it. And the Palestinians basically went for a picnic and just never came back. But that's not what happened at all, right? So
that's right.
What happened in 1948?
Well, as you know, there was a lot leading up to it, but essentially 1948 is the year that more than 750,000 Palestinians were dispossessed, ethnically cleansed from Palestine. There was this myth that Palestine was a land without a people for a people without a land, and that was absolutely untrue. Palestinians had been living there for centuries and had a very robust, lives there. In the movie we depict Jaffa in 1948, which was the center of Palestinian cultural and economic life. The citrus groves were a kind of booming a trade there, and you see, in the family, the sort of main character in 1948 is a father who owns, orange groves. And so it's really the first time that we see a story about the Nakba, and for me, I don't think that you can make a movie about the Nakba without really making telling a kind of multi-generational story, because the Nakba never ended. What happened in 1948, this ethnic cleansing that began in 48, has never really ended. It has only escalated and escalated over the decades until it has become, what we see today, which is an ongoing genocide.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the Nakba is a word that means the catastrophe. And that's what happened to Palestinians when Israel was formed. And Cherien, I was taught in high school in America that phrase that you just mentioned. Zionism was beautiful and amazing because it took a people without a land to a land without a people. And I was like, wait a minute, then how about the 750,000 people that left? If the land didn't have any people, then who were the 750,000, right?
Right, and they were in many cases, forcibly expelled. There were many massacres at the time. I believe it's more than 500 Arab villages were destroyed. I mean, there's all of these events that took place in those years, leading up to 1948 and then post 1948. That were absolutely just catastrophic for Palestinians. And that's what we're referring to when we say the Nakba. And that was, 1948 is what we call the year of the Nakba, and it is really truly never ended.
Yeah, and you see it now in Gaza, of course. And Israel has taken 53% of Gaza, and they take more and more of it every day. They keep expanding the yellow line. They're never going to give it back. And they say, and they voted on this, they said, we're never going to allow Palestine to be a state. So, I mean, it's the world's biggest hypocrisy. It's saying, they cry all the time, oh, they don't want Israel to exist. And then they say, oh, but we literally will not allow Palestine to exist. No.
Right, nor will they really allow Palestinians to exist. I mean, they don't allow our history to exist. The history that you and I are talking about right now is actually actively denied to this day. This is a history that is omitted from history books. Daily we see headlines that are, not telling the whole truth, if they're even telling the truth at all. So yeah, there's a lot of active denial, censorship, erasure of Palestine and Palestinians that continues.
Yeah, so I want to talk about what's happening today. I want to talk about the movie, but last thing on this. Look, guys, if you're wondering out there, you're not Palestinian, you're not Israeli, you're like, I don't know, one side says this, the other side says that, how do I know what's right? Well, first of all, everyone agrees 750,000 people were expelled, right? So then, but the Israelis say, oh, they left voluntarily.
Right.
And there was no violence. They all just decided my ancestral home, the home I live in physically right now with my family and all my belongings and my farmland, etc. I'll just leave it behind for no reason at all. I'll just leave. And the Palestinians say, no, we left because we were scared to death for our lives because we just saw them slaughter the Palestinian village next door to us. What do you think is more likely to be correct? Come on. Like, that's not close. Anyone with any degree of logic knows which side is correct and which side isn't. And that's why it's so frustrating that American media has lied to the American people my entire life. So that leads to my question, Cherien. You got Mark Ruffalo and Javier Bardem as executive producers of this movie. This movie, if you had put this out 20 years ago, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, it would have been shunned. It probably would have been called anti-Semitic. It would have been this, that, and the other thing. But now you have some of the biggest stars in Hollywood saying, no, I'm gonna actively produce this movie and it's getting all of these accolades. It feels like the tide has begun to turn, but you have a better perspective than I do on this. Are you seeing a little bit different world these days in the West and America?
I think so, yeah. I mean, funny enough, I've been feeling the tide turning for a little while. As a Palestinian American, I've grown up just kind of obsessed with the media landscape. Knowing from a young age that we were being actively dehumanized, and that the media was perpetuating dangerous stereotypes of us. And my family, experienced great racism because of that, like really horrific racism, and so I've been really watching the media landscape from the time that I was a kid. And I would say, Gaza's been bombarded, as you know, many, many times. And people have a way of forgetting how many times we've bombed Gaza and have just murdered, tens of thousands of people over the course of all of these years. 2021, I felt a very big shift. And I had started writing the script in 2020. So I started thinking about the story as early as 2014, once again, when Gaza was being bombarded. So in a funny way, this script came, years before the current events. But I started to feel like the tide is turning and I want to do something that can help be part of that turning tide. Of course, I had no way of knowing, where we would end up and how quickly things would take such a horrific turn, and that we would watch one of the most painful chapters of Palestinian history unfold as we were shooting this film.
So again, in the past, I feel like if you had written this same exact script and you took it to folks, it probably would not have been made. So tell me about what happened in this case that led to it being made and now receiving these accolades.
Well, interestingly enough, I really took my time developing this, and I didn't take it out into the world until I felt, I felt that the script was ready. I took it out in 2021, actually. And this was one of those moments where I felt like it feels, this feels different. People are really talking about the bombardment of Gaza right now. People seem concerned. Even people in Hollywood who I never expected to kind of reach out and ask me if I was okay because of what was happening were reaching out and asking me if I was okay because of what was happening. And this really moved me. Like I felt seen for the first time as a Palestinian, and I think that you're absolutely right. Had I taken this out years before, I don't know, I think people would have been way too scared. I think in 2021, I took it to just a very small handful of American companies, and I got very quick passes. So, this film was not financed in any kind of a traditional way. I partnered with European producers. I found financing in Europe and the Arab world. I knew even in 2021 that there was no way that I was going to get financing in Hollywood for this film. And even today, I mean, there's just no way that you would get financing in Hollywood for a film like this, or really any Palestinian film. It just wouldn't happen. Even despite all of the shifts and the kind of changing tide and the fact that humanity is waking up, and the fact that, you have Mark Ruffalo and Javier Bardem and many, many other Hollywood, powerhouses speaking out. I think that you still wouldn't, a script like this in Hollywood would not get made.
Yeah, but the tides are changing, and they're changing right in front of our eyes. And so, tell us about the family that's the center of this movie. Give us a little bit of sense of what happens to them.
Well, like I mentioned, we follow one family over 3 generations. And so you really kind of follow grandfather, father, and son. And so the film opens with a protest in Palestine, and really a moment of violence that rocks this family. And there's a teenage boy at a protest, and he's the one that experiences this moment of violence. And before we ever really find out what happens to him, or whether, like, how badly he was hurt, we cut to the face of an old woman who looks straight into the camera and sets up the story, and essentially says, I'm gonna tell you the story of my son, but to tell you his story, I have to start with the story of his grandfather. And the reason I set up the story that way was because, for decades, we've been watching Palestinians protest. We've been watching teenage boys throw rocks and put themselves in harm's way, and stare down the barrels of M16s. But we've never really gotten to see who these boys are, who these young men are. We've never really understood the army is invading their refugee camp. We've never really gotten to see how their families ended up in the refugee camp to begin with. And so through this opening and this moment of violence that this teenage boy experiences, the mother takes us back in time to tell the family story, and essentially tell the story of how the family ended up in the refugee camp to begin with, and how this teenage boy really became who he is. Why he's so fervently, chanting for a free Palestine at this protest, so that we really come to understand what this family has been through in order to kind of get to this moment of violence. And then, we catch up with the moment of violence about 2/3 of the way through the film, and we find out what happens to this teenager. So it's really, you follow grandfather, father, and son. You really get to be with this family in order to understand the impact of all of these events on them. And that was really my interest here, was how can I tell the story of how we have been impacted by political events, not the story of the political events. That's the background. Really, what is the foreground of this film is that intimate family story, where you really come to understand the emotional experience of all of this devastation on people.
Yeah, there's that old quote from Stalin, and I'll paraphrase it here. You kill one person, it's murder. You kill 100,000 people, it's a statistic. And so that's why I think movies are so important, because it humanizes those statistics. It's one thing to hear that 20,000 Palestinian children have been killed in Gaza. in just this last
Right.
round, right? It's another
Right.
thing to see a family and get emotionally attached to them, and then
Right.
see what happens to them. So that's why I think movies are so important, and there have not been a lot of Palestinian voices that have been, able to allowed to make movies, and so we've seen the opposite point of view in media about 200% of the time. So that's why I think your movie is so important. But let me ask you one last question about it. So a lot of people will see it and wonder, is it a real family, or is it an amalgamation of the stories that you know from several different families?
Well, at the beginning of the film, I say that it's based on historical fact. So, the background, the kind of macro political events of the film are all historical. But the family at the center of the film is fictional, though they are inspired by my own family, and specifically my dad and my dad's side of the family. My dad was exiled from Palestine in 1967. And much like the characters in the film, he had to get foreign citizenship just to return to visit his family and the only home he'd ever known. And as a kid, I went back with him. We all went back as a family to visit his family in Palestine, and I saw him harassed and humiliated at borders and checkpoints. And so there's definitely the parts of the story that came from my own experience, kind of visiting Palestine and seeing the things that I saw. And also just witnessing my dad's heartache over his exile, over the deteriorating situation in his homeland, seeing the different generations of my family, from my grandfather to my father to my siblings and I, and how our identities were formed by what was happening in Palestine. And also by, kind of by each other. Our identities were formed in relationship or in opposition to each other. I saw my dad become more and more disillusioned. I saw him become angrier and angrier. I saw his health suffer because of how angry he was and how devastated he was over the, just the deteriorating situation. And I wanted to find a different way. And I think I could say, I saw him looking to the past, and so I started looking to the future and thinking, what can I do? How can I be helpful? I need to tell our stories. And that's, one of the reasons why I wanted to become a storyteller, is sort of to take action and say, like, okay, how can I channel this trauma into something that could be of use and that could try to, move the needle in some way on Palestine?
Cherien, you mentioned a word there I gotta ask about. And I think it's probably the most underrated part of the evil of this occupation, which is humiliation. So we see the death, we see the injuries, we see the human rights abuses, et cetera. But I think what doesn't come through enough about an occupation like this is the daily humiliation. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much to occupation that I think people don't know about. This is occupation just sounds like a very benign term. But it's something that is so brutally violent, and there's different kinds of violence under occupation. And humiliation is one of those kinds of violence. It's a psychological, emotional type of violence that is meant to really break people. And Palestinians suffer it every single day. It's part of what the more than 500, or I think it's up to 700 checkpoints within the West Bank alone. You're constantly meant to wait. You're constantly meant to be, inconvenienced in the most, horrible of ways. And that's the kind of that's the sort of lighter part of the occupation. But when this is happening on a daily basis, when you're being stopped and interrogated and then meant to do things just to embarrass you in front of others, just for the whim of, young soldiers who are having a good time, which is something we see often. It's really meant to break you. I think that, there's one of the things I wanted to do in this film is show the different kinds of violence. There's the physical violence, but then there's the psychological, and then there's also the administrative violence, which you also see in the film, where families are unable to get the medical attention that they need. They're not able to get permits to travel to where they need to go. They're separated from their families. They're separated from their land. They're separated from their schools. This is a type of violence. And I think, it's so much more than just physical, and those are the different kinds of things I wanted to show in this film in order to show really kind of the brutality of occupation.
Yeah, I mean, I had a Palestinian family tell me a story about they're going on a trip. They've got their stuff with them. Israeli IDF comes by, takes out all of their belongings that they were going on the trip with, throws them all over the road, picks out the 7-year-old Palestinian girl in the family and says, now clean it all up, right? Why? Because they can. And we've all seen the videos of them marching out Palestinian men in their underwear in the middle of town just to humiliate them. It's just disgusting, and it's part of the dehumanization. Okay, but again, the movie's doing great. So last question is, what's your top hope for what we get out of this movie?
You know, I didn't make a violent film. I didn't want to make a violent film. There are moments of violence in the film, and they're not all physical violence. You know, I was just mentioning the many different kinds of violence that Palestinians experience under occupation. And so there are these very carefully chosen moments of violence throughout the film. And the reason they're there is in order for us to see the consequences of that violence. And in order for us to really understand, you know, again, how people are impacted by all of this. And you know, what is the reason, the purpose of this oppressive, you know, horrifically oppressive apartheid system in so many ways is to break us down. You know, and the movie really looks at Palestinian men and the way Palestinian men are particularly brutalized. And I really think the system is meant to just break us down. And what I really wanted to do with this film is really show the extraordinary will and love that it takes to survive this kind of violence, to you know, to even to transcend it, to try to really just like, you know, figure out how do I feel this pain and therefore not bottle it up and feel rage and hatred in my heart. And ultimately, you know, what's left of any of us at the end of the day when we've survived anything horrific is love. You know, that's what keeps us going. That's what keeps us here. And I think for me, the movie is meant to remind us of that. Like at the end of the day, like all we have is our love. And I really want people to take that away from this film. You know, the fact that that's how we get through this.
Yep. All right, Cherien Dabis, the writer, director, and producer of All That's Left of You, that is on the Oscar shortlist for Best International Feature Film. Hopefully the next time we see Cherien, she's accepting an Academy Award. Thank you so much for joining us, inshallah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.